In the scorching heart of the ancient world, where empires rose and fell in the shadow of gods and kings, one story has echoed through the centuries, a tale of an army so vast and powerful that it seemed invincible, yet it vanished without leaving a single trace. The mystery begins with Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, who inherited the vast Persian Empire at the height of its strength. He was a ruler consumed with ambition, determined to expand his dominion beyond Persia and Babylon, to seize Egypt, and to crush all who resisted his will. His conquest of Egypt in 525 BCE was brutal and swift, marked by the fall of Pharaoh Psamtik III and the collapse of the proud Saita dynasty. To Cambyses, this was not just a victory of swords and spears, it was a triumph of destiny, proof that Persia was the chosen force meant to bend the world beneath its banners. But victory only fed his hunger. Egypt was conquered, yet Cambyses saw more enemies, more defiance, and more honor to be won. Among his greatest frustrations were the Libyans and the priests of Ammon, worshippers of a powerful deity in the remote Siwa oasis. According to Herodotus, when Cambyses demanded their submission and recognition of his rule, the priests of Ammon mocked him, declaring that he was no true conqueror and that the gods would never recognize his reign. Insults to the divine could not be ignored in the Age of Kings, and to Cambyses, such defiance was a personal wound to his pride. His anger became obsession, and he resolved to send a massive army into the desert, ordering them to march across the burning sands to the Siwa oasis, where they would punish the priests and prove once more that not even the gods could withstand Persia's might. The army he gathered was said to number 50,000 men, a staggering force of soldiers, engineers, and attendants. To the Persians, this was not simply a mission of conquest but of sacred vengeance. To march into the vast Libyan desert, with its shifting dunes and merciless sun, was to challenge nature itself. The men were equipped for war, but the enemy they would face was not a rival army, not walls or fortresses, but the endless horizon of sand. The desert had swallowed countless travelers before, but never had it been dared by such a multitude. The sight of this massive column setting out from Thebes, with banners snapping in the wind and ranks stretching farther than the eye could see, must have been awe-inspiring, a reminder of Persia's limitless strength. And yet, as they marched, perhaps a shadow hung over them, a sense of unease whispered by Egyptian guides and desert nomads who knew the unforgiving cruelty of the Sahara. This beginning carries both triumph and dread, the story of a king whose victories convinced him that the world itself would bow, and of an army that would stride boldly into a land where no human force could dictate the terms. Their disappearance, hinted at in the very first telling, casts a chilling shadow over the tale. For in the silence of the desert, the ambition of Cambyses II and the fate of 50,000 men would collide with forces beyond their control, setting the stage for one of history's greatest and most haunting mysteries. The Persian army's march into the Libyan desert was unlike any campaign the empire had attempted before. Unlike lush river valleys or fortified cities, this was a place where the land itself was the enemy, where survival depended on water skins, shadows, and sheer endurance. Herodotus, writing a century later, described how 50,000 men set out from Thebes, armed with spears, shields, and bows, yet more vulnerable than ever, for they carried with them not only weapons of war but the weight of their king's pride. They were told to march westward across the sands to reach the remote Siwa oasis, where the priests of Ammon lived. For Cambyses, this mission was not only about punishing insolence, it was about proving that Persian power extended into the very heart of the desert, a place that Egyptians believed belonged to their gods. The logistical challenge was staggering. Ancient armies relied on supply lines and local resources to sustain themselves, but in the vast Sahara there were no rivers to drink from, no fertile fields to raid, no cities to plunder. Water had to be carried in skin bags on the backs of camels, while dried grains and salted meat were rationed with military precision. The heat during the day was so fierce that men could collapse in exhaustion, their armor burning against their skin, while the freezing winds at night chilled them to the bone. The desert was a battlefield of extremes, and even the best prepared force would have been pushed to its limits. To the soldiers marching beneath the relentless sun, each horizon must have seemed endless, each step a test of endurance. Still, the army advanced, and the size of their column must have been staggering to behold. Imagine wave after wave of men, weapons glinting in the sun, banners marking divisions, and dust rising in a shimmering cloud as tens of thousands pressed forward. Cambyses was not with them, he had remained behind in Memphis, but the men carried his authority and his wrath into the sands. At first, there may have been confidence, even bravado, as Persian soldiers had conquered lands far harsher than Egypt. Yet as the days turned into weeks, the desert revealed its merciless hand. The dunes shifted with the wind, erasing tracks and disorienting guides. The sun beat down without mercy, turning the horizon into a wavering mirage, so that men stumbled after visions of water that dissolved into nothing. Herodotus tells us that after days of travel, the army reached a halfway point where they stopped to prepare for the final push toward Siwa. It was then, he says, that disaster struck. A storm unlike any other swept across the desert, violent winds carrying walls of sand that blotted out the sky. 4 hours, perhaps days, the storm raged, burying tents, supplies, and men themselves beneath choking dunes. Herodotus claims that not a single man survived, that 50,000 soldiers were swallowed whole, leaving only silence where once an empire's strength had marched. To him, it was divine retribution, the gods of Egypt punishing Cambyses for his arrogance. Whether the tale of the sandstorm is literal truth or ancient exaggeration, the emotional weight of the account cannot be denied. An entire army, men who had fought in great battles, who had believed themselves invincible under the banner of Persia, perished in the most helpless way imaginable, not cut down by swords, but erased by nature itself. Their families never saw them again, their king never heard word of their fate, and history was left with only rumor and fragments of memory. The desert had triumphed where no army could, and in that silence, the mystery of the vanished force began to take shape. When the Persian army vanished into the desert, what followed was not simply the end of a military expedition, but the birth of one of history's most enduring mysteries. Ancient and modern voices have tried to explain what happened, each theory offering a glimpse into the possibilities of how 50,000 men could disappear without leaving behind a single survivor. Herodotus gave the earliest and most dramatic account. The soldiers were engulfed by a massive sandstorm, a natural catastrophe so overwhelming that it buried them alive in a shifting sea of dunes. The image is terrifying. Men struggling to breathe as sand filled their mouths and lungs, shields and spears swallowed by waves of dust, and the sheer helplessness of an army brought low by the forces of nature. To the ancient Greeks and Egyptians, this explanation was fitting, for it reflected the idea of divine punishment, a judgment by the gods against Cambyses' hubris. Yet not all scholars accept this tale as literal truth. Some suggest that Herodotus, who relied on Egyptian informants, may have been told a story shaped more by myth than reality. The desert is merciless, but an entire army vanishing without trace raises questions. One theory proposes that the army may never have reached the Siwa oasis at all. They could have been ambushed by local forces, possibly Egyptians loyal to the old dynasty or Libyan tribes hostile to Persian rule. An attack in the middle of the desert would have been devastating. With limited supplies and no safe retreat, even a smaller force could have routed the Persians. The silence that followed could be explained by annihilation in battle, the corpses left to decay in the sand, unrecorded and unmarked. Another possibility is that the Persian force suffered not from one single catastrophic event but from the gradual unraveling of logistics. A campaign of such magnitude required flawless coordination of food, water, and guidance through treacherous terrain. If water ran out, if guides betrayed them or lost their way, if morale collapsed under the weight of exhaustion, the army could have splintered. Groups of men may have deserted, attempting to survive on their own, scattering into the desert until none remained. Such an ending is less dramatic than the vision of a sudden sandstorm, but perhaps more realistic. Armies throughout history have disintegrated not in battle, but in hunger, thirst, and confusion. Modern archaeology has added its own layer to the mystery. Some expeditions have uncovered fragments, bronze weapons, arrowheads, and pottery that could belong to the lost army. These discoveries fuel the possibility that Herodotus' story, while embellished, had a kernel of truth. Still, no mass graves or definitive traces of 50,000 men have ever been found, leaving speculation wide open. The emotional power of the mystery lies in this absence. If it had been a battle, there would be ruins and bones. If it had been mere desertion, survivors might have lived to tell the tale. But the silence, the complete void of evidence, deepens the enigma. Perhaps the most haunting explanation is that we will never truly know. The desert is both a preserver and a destroyer, capable of hiding secrets beneath its endless sands for millennia. Each theory, sandstorm, ambush, starvation, or slow collapse, captures something of the terror those men must have felt. They were not defeated by swords or arrows, but by an invisible hand that left no trace, erasing them from history in a way that even the mightiest empires could not undo. And in that absence, their fate became legend, a warning about the limits of human ambition and the cruel indifference of nature. The mystery of the lost army did not fade with the passing of centuries. Instead, it grew, drawing the curiosity of travelers, scholars, and treasure-seekers who dreamed of uncovering the truth buried beneath the sands. By the 19th century, explorers inspired by Herodotus began to scour the western desert, convinced that somewhere between Thebes and the Siwa oasis lay the remains of Cambyses' 50,000 men. Rumors spread of nomads who had stumbled upon bleached bones and rusted weapons, fragments of a catastrophe half-remembered in oral traditions. For Europeans obsessed with rediscovering the ancient world, the idea of solving one of history's greatest enigmas was irresistible. Reports of discoveries began to surface. Some explorers claimed to have found bronze arrowheads and Persian-style weapons scattered in the desert. Others told of fragments of pottery or human bones exposed after shifting sands revealed what had long been hidden. Each alleged discovery ignited excitement, but none were ever conclusive enough to prove that the artifacts belonged to Cambyses' army. The desert is vast, and objects can easily be misattributed. A broken weapon might belong to a small caravan, a nomadic skirmish, or even later Roman patrols. Yet the allure of connecting them to the vanished Persians was too great to resist. In the 20th and 21st centuries, modern archaeology took a more scientific approach. Teams equipped with aerial photography, satellite imaging, and ground surveys searched for patterns, ancient campsites, burial grounds, or the remains of supply caches. Some researchers believed they had found possible evidence, arrowheads, metal fragments, and even reports of mass bones discovered by local Bedouins. In 2009, an Italian team announced they had uncovered remains of soldiers, tools, and weapon fragments near the desert routes that matched Herodotus' descriptions. While these findings remain debated, they fueled global headlines, reviving the legend for a modern audience hungry for answers. What makes these searches so powerful is the mix of science and suspense. Each excavation feels like a detective story played out against a backdrop of endless dunes. Every shard unearthed could be the key to solving a mystery more than 2,000 years old, yet every lead also risks collapsing into disappointment when tested against the evidence. The desert continues to withhold its secrets, sometimes offering tantalizing fragments but never the decisive proof. That uncertainty keeps the legend alive, ensuring that Cambyses' lost army remains not just a tale of the past, but a puzzle that challenges both historians and dreamers today. The disappearance of Cambyses II's army was not just a military disaster, it marked the beginning of a profound unraveling of his reign and a dramatic turning point in Persian history. Before the expedition, Cambyses had been seen as a formidable ruler, a king whose victories in Egypt and Babylon extended the reach of the Persian Empire to its greatest heights. He had inherited a kingdom forged by his father, Cyrus the Great, whose conquests and diplomacy had created an empire unparalleled in the ancient world. Yet the failure of the desert campaign revealed a vulnerability that no military success could mask. 50,000 soldiers, trained, armed, and prepared for conquest, were gone, swallowed by the sands without a trace. This loss was not merely numerical, it was a symbolic collapse, shaking the perception of Cambyses' invincibility and leaving both allies and subjects questioning his judgment. The psychological impact on the king was profound. Historical accounts portray Cambyses as descending into erratic behavior after the disaster. He became increasingly obsessed with religious rituals, at times disrespectful to the very deities he had once sought to honor, and he reportedly engaged in cruel and unpredictable acts toward his own people. Whether these accounts are accurate or exaggerated by historians with an agenda, they reflect the widespread perception of a ruler whose ambition had overstepped human limits. The lost army was a stark reminder that even the mightiest empires could falter, and that human pride often invites unforeseen consequences. It was not merely the desert that defeated him, It was the combination of environmental forces and the hubris that propelled him to risk 50,000 lives in an almost mythic pursuit of vengeance and prestige. The repercussions extended far beyond Cambyses himself. The Persian grip on Egypt, though initially strong, became increasingly tenuous as word of the army's disappearance spread. Local populations, previously subdued by fear of Persian military might, began to resist more openly, emboldened by the notion that the king's forces were not invincible. Rebellions and unrest, while contained, revealed the fragile nature of an empire built as much on intimidation as on administration. Cambyses' advisors and generals, too, faced uncertainty. The loss of so many men created gaps in leadership, disrupted communication lines, and undermined confidence in command. The vacuum left by the vanished army forced a re-evaluation of strategy and stretched resources thinner than ever, leaving the empire vulnerable to both internal dissent and external threats. At the core of this tragedy lies a timeless theme: hubris punished by forces beyond human control. Cambyses had sought to assert dominance over both men and the natural world, believing that his ambition, discipline, and authority could bend even the desert to his will. Instead, he was confronted with the stark reality that nature does not yield to kings or empires. The desert's merciless climate, scorching sun, shifting sands, and scarce water, proved far more formidable than any human foe. In this light, the loss of the army becomes more than a historical curiosity. It is a vivid illustration of the limits of power and the dangers of overreach. It is the story of a ruler who mistook audacity for invincibility and paid a devastating price. The fate of the army itself remains a haunting element of the story. Whether they perished in a sudden sandstorm, slowly succumbed to thirst and exhaustion, or were scattered and lost to the desert over time, the emotional impact is universal. These were men who had trained, fought, and marched with loyalty and courage, only to vanish into obscurity. Families never received closure, comrades were left unburied, and history was left with silence where once a massive force had marched. The scale of the loss amplifies the tragedy, and the enduring mystery ensures that the story resonates across millennia, evoking both awe and sorrow. Ultimately, the disaster in the desert did not merely end with the army's disappearance. It reshaped the perception of Cambyses' reign and illustrated the precarious balance between ambition, human endeavor, and the forces of nature. His empire survived, but the legend of the vanished army cast a long shadow over his legacy. The desert, indifferent and eternal, served as a silent witness to the limits of imperial power and the consequences of arrogance. The narrative remains a powerful reminder that history is often determined as much by the whims of nature as by the designs of kings, and that even the most meticulously planned campaigns can be undone by circumstances beyond human understanding. The story of the lost Persian army has echoed through history not only as a tale of vanished soldiers but as a haunting reminder of human ambition and the unpredictable power of nature. Over 2 millennia later, historians, archaeologists, and storytellers continue to debate what truly happened, yet the mystery remains unresolved. The desert, vast and indifferent, has swallowed countless secrets, preserving some and erasing others, leaving only fragments of evidence for those willing to search. Each shard of pottery, rusted weapon, or skeletal remnant discovered raises more questions than answers, fueling the imagination of modern explorers and scholars alike. The absence of definitive proof creates a tension that transcends time, a story suspended between fact and legend, where imagination fills the gaps left by history. This enduring enigma serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of human control. Cambyses too may have commanded one of the greatest armies of the ancient world, but his inability to account for the desert's extremes transformed his triumph into tragedy. The vanished soldiers are remembered not for their victories or campaigns, but for their disappearance, a stark illustration of how even immense preparation and strategy can fail against forces beyond human understanding. It is a story that resonates with modern audiences precisely because it combines ambition, human error, and the cruel indifference of nature. Moreover, the legend of the lost army has influenced how we perceive ancient empires and their leaders. Cambyses' hubris, his overreach, and the ultimate silence of his army invite reflection on power, mortality, and the fragility of human endeavors. Scholars continue to piece together the narrative, blending archaeology, historical texts, and myth, each attempt revealing both the sophistication of Persian military planning and the unpredictable vulnerabilities they faced. For viewers today, the tale offers both suspense and insight, a compelling blend of history, mystery, and human drama. In the end, The Vanished Army is more than a story of death or defeat. It is a mirror reflecting the eternal struggle between ambition and environment, control and chaos. The sands of the Libyan desert remain a timeless witness, holding secrets that may never be fully uncovered, leaving us to wonder what truly became of 50,000 men who dared to challenge the desert and were claimed by it forever. Their story lingers, a silent echo of history's power to captivate, terrify, and inspire.